A Ponzi scheme is one of the simplest frauds in human history, and somehow one of the most effective. Pay early investors with money from new investors. No actual business, no actual profits. Just a constant flow of new victims funding payouts to old ones. It works until it does not. And when it collapses, it takes down everyone who trusted it. This is the story of the people who perfected it. Charles Ponzi. The scheme is named after him for a reason. In 1920, Charles Ponzi promised investors in Boston a 50% return in 45 days. His claimed strategy involved buying discounted international postal coupons and redeeming them at full value in the United States. It sounded complicated enough to be believable and simple enough to be tempting. Investors poured in. He paid early investors exactly what he promised, using money from new investors flooding in behind them. Word spread. Lines formed outside his office. At his peak, he was taking in over $1 million a week, an almost unimaginable sum in 1920. The actual postal coupon arbitrage was barely real and could never have generated the returns he was paying out. The entire operation was funded by new money replacing old money. When a newspaper investigation exposed the math did not work, the scheme collapsed within days. Investors lost approximately $20 million, hundreds of millions in today's money. Charles Ponzi went to prison, but his name became the permanent label for every fraud that followed his exact playbook. Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff ran the largest and longest-running Ponzi scheme in history, and he did it in plain sight for over 15 years. Madoff was a respected figure on Wall Street. He had served as chairman of NASDAQ. He ran a legitimate market-making business alongside his investment advisory arm. That legitimacy gave him credibility that made the fraud almost impossible for outsiders to suspect. His investment fund promised steady, consistent returns of around 10 to 12% every single year, regardless of market conditions. Even during market crashes, his returns stayed remarkably stable. Sophisticated investors should have recognized that consistency as a massive red flag. Markets do not work that smoothly. Almost nobody questioned it because the returns were good, but not so extreme that they seemed impossible. In reality, there was no actual trading happening. Account statements sent to investors were completely fabricated. New investor money was simply used to pay returns to existing investors and to fund the lifestyle of Madoff and his family. The fraud survived for so long, partly because Madoff was selective about who he let invest, creating a sense of exclusivity that discouraged questions, and partly because regulators repeatedly failed to act on warnings. A financial analyst named Harry Markopolos submitted detailed evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission multiple times over nearly a decade, explaining mathematically why Madoff's returns were impossible. The SEC investigated and found nothing each time. The scheme finally collapsed in December 2008 during the broader financial crisis, when a wave of investors simultaneously tried to withdraw their money and Madoff could not produce the funds. He confessed to his sons that the entire business was one big lie. The fraud totaled approximately $65 billion in claimed paper value. Real losses to investors were estimated at around $20 billion in actual invested principal. Victims included individual retirees who had entrusted their life savings, charitable foundations that lost their entire endowments, and even Holocaust survivor funds. Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in prison and died in custody in 2021. Stanford. While Madoff was collapsing in the United States, another massive Ponzi scheme was unraveling almost simultaneously. Stanford built a financial empire centered around Stanford International Bank, based in Antigua, which sold certificates of deposit promising unusually high guaranteed returns. He cultivated an image as a legitimate international financier, sponsoring cricket tournaments, socializing with politicians, even receiving a knighthood from the government of Antigua. His certificates of deposit promised returns significantly higher than what legitimate banks were offering, attracting investors who believed they had found a safe, high-yield alternative. In reality, the bank's claimed investment portfolio was largely fictional. Real estate holdings were wildly overvalued. The actual returns being generated were nowhere close to what was being promised or paid out. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and Stanford's house of cards became impossible to maintain, the fraud unraveled. Investigators discovered a fraud spanning approximately $7 billion, affecting tens of thousands of investors across multiple countries, with many losing their entire retirement savings. Stanford was convicted and sentenced to 110 years in prison. Zeek Rewards. Not every massive Ponzi scheme involves Wall Street sophistication. Some are built entirely online, targeting ordinary people through the promise of easy passive income. Zeek Rewards, launched in 2010, marketed as a way to earn money through an online penny auction platform. Participants paid to become affiliates and were promised daily returns based on the company's advertising revenue. In reality, the platform generated almost none of the revenue needed to support the payouts being promised. New investor money funded payments to existing investors in the exact same pattern as every Ponzi scheme before, it just wrapped in modern internet marketing language about passive income and online business opportunities. The scheme attracted approximately 1 million participants before the SEC shut it down in 2012, having taken in over $850 million. Many participants were ordinary people who had been promised financial freedom and instead lost savings they could not afford to lose. FTX. The newest entry on this list looked nothing like a traditional Ponzi scheme on the surface, but functioned remarkably similarly underneath. FTX was a cryptocurrency exchange founded by Sam Bankman-Fried, who cultivated an image as a brilliant philanthropic responsible figure in an industry often criticized for recklessness. He testified before Congress. He donated heavily to political campaigns. He appeared on magazine covers as crypto's golden boy. Behind the scenes, FTX was secretly funneling customer deposits to its affiliated trading firm, Alameda Research, which used those funds to make speculative bets and cover its own losses. Customer money that was supposed to be sitting safely in individual accounts was being used to prop up a failing trading operation, creating exactly the structure of a fraud built on using new and existing customer funds to maintain the appearance of solvency. When a competitor's report raised questions about FTX's financial health, customers rushed to withdraw their funds simultaneously. The money was not there. $8 billion in customer deposits had vanished into the hole created by Alameda's losses. Bankman-Fried was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Customers who trusted an exchange celebrated by Congress and the media were left fighting in bankruptcy court to recover a fraction of what they had deposited. Every single one of these schemes followed the same basic structure across more than a century. A charismatic figure promises returns that seem too good to question, but not so extreme that they seem impossible. Early investors get paid exactly what they were promised, creating trust and word of mouth. New investor money funds those payments instead of any real underlying business. The whole structure survives only as long as new money keeps flowing in faster than it flows out. They all collapse eventually. The only question is, how many people get hurt before they do? That is what Capital Code is here to expose. Subscribe for a new breakdown every week.